Thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar, The ABCs of Awesome Lighting Terminology, presented by Brad Schiller. My name is Mallory Misnarsic and I'm the project manager here at Harman. Just a few things before we get started. Everyone on the call is muted to keep down noise levels during the webinar. However, there is a Q&A function where you can submit questions to the presenter and he'll try to answer as many as possible at the end. This webinar will also be recorded and a link will be made available a few days after this presentation. We do have a number of other webinars taking place over the next few months for audio, lighting, video, and control. We encourage you to take a look at the different webinars in our Learning Sessions Workshop series on pro.harman.com, as well as visiting Harman Professional Training to see our many on-demand and certification courses that are available to you for free. And now I'd like to introduce you to Brad, the presenter for today's webinar. Brad has been involved in automated lighting for over 30 years and is currently a business development manager at Martin Professional. He's the author of the newly released Living the Lighting Life, as well as the Automated Lighting Programmer's Handbook. He's also a regular columnist for PLSN and a self-described lighting geek. Brad enjoys sharing knowledge with others. And now I'll pass it over to you, Brad.
Thank you, Mallory. And thank you everyone for joining today. This is going to be a really fun, different kind of presentation. And I appreciate that you're taking time out of your day to join live or watch this later on YouTube, whatever the conditions may be for you today. So, we'll be talking about terminology and words and a lot of different words. And words I find very interesting because it's how we speak, it's how we communicate. Now, experts believe that language began hundreds of thousands of years ago. Pretty much as humans were developing, they had to find a way to communicate. So, of course, they began to speak. But written word, actually writing out things the way we know it, other than maybe scrawling in the side of a cave or something, that's seemed to be around for about 5,000 years or so, give or take. A little more than 5,000, but generally people tend to believe about 5,000 years written word really took off. Now, in that time, if we think about English, because of course there's many different languages all over the world, but I'm in America and I speak English, so I'm going to give you a little facts about English words. In English, experts believe there's about 1.1 million words in the English vocabulary. It's outstanding that there's that many, and about 1,000 are added every year. So there's all kinds of new ones added all the time. I know one that was recently added called doom scrolling. Doom scrolling is when you're scrolling looking for bad news on your device. That's pretty funny to me. But out of those 100,000 or 1.1 million words that are out there, really a lot of them are no longer in use, or they're different forms of words and things. So there's about 170,000 English words that are actually in use today. That's still quite a lot of words. Don't worry, I'm not going to cover all of them today. We're not going to go through all 170. And in fact, the experts also say that each of us actually has a vocabulary, our own vocabulary, so I can't even say that word, our own vocabulary of about 20 to 30,000 words. So when we distill it all down of all those words, of those English words, we each have a vocabulary of about 20 to 30,000 words. Now, when we talk about what we do in our industry, there are a bunch of words we use. There's words we use to talk about scenic, about the theater, about concerts, but we're going to talk about lighting words. And modern stage lighting and automated lighting all began roughly 40 years ago. You can go a little further back. In fact, you can watch the history presentation that Craig Rutherford and I did to get a little insight into the products. But generally, we're talking in the last 40 years, most of these terms came up. Today, I'm going to go through and I'm going to talk about 100 different words. It was a little more I had originally, I scaled it back. We're going to talk about 100 words, my favorite kind of words that we use in our industry, talking about lighting. Some of them are lighting related, some of them are a little more theater related or just general terms. But these are words that really stand out to me as special or fun. These aren't just basic words. And there are many, many more words that we use that I'm not going to cover today. But these are the ones that I'm familiar with and that I really like. Again, it's going to be a little North American centric because that's where I live. But I'm going to also call out some that are international words or specific to other areas of the world. So let's dive right in. We're, of course, going to go through the alphabet because this is the ABCs. So we're going to start right away on, guess what, the letter A. So starting right away, we're going to talk about additive color mixing. Additive color mixing is a great color theory, and that is that you take different segments of light. They could be LED chips, it could be different lighting fixtures with different gels or colors on them. and you add them together to create white and or to create other color mixes. So typically we think of that nowadays as RGB. So RGB LEDs add together to make white light or white-ish light. Of course, you can add other emitters into just RGB, but additive color mixing is a really cool term that we use to talk about when we're mixing different colors of light together to create white light. Address is kind of pretty interesting. I have an address. It's where I live, right here in my home. I'm not going to share what my address is. I'm sure you can probably find it online like everything else. But in our realm, we talk about the address of a fixture. Every fixture has a DMX address. And where did that come from? Well, what that really means is in the DMX universe, each fixture uses a range of channels. So it might use 20 channels to control that fixture. The very first channel that that fixture is going to use of the DMX universe is typically its DMX address. So if a fixture is set to DMX address 1, then it's going to use channels 1 through 20. If it's set to start at DMX address 41, then it's going to use DMX channels 41 through 61 if it had 20 channels. So that's just an example, but address is a common term that we use to talk about where that fixture lives in the universe. And it can also include which universe it's on as well. It doesn't just have to be the exact DMX address. It also, the address could be universe 5, DMX 47, and then that tells you where it lies on your DMX chain. Aerial is generally something that talks about things in the air. So if we go see a show, say from Cirque du Soleil, there'll be aerial performers that are performing and moving and flying through the air and doing cool things. Well, in our lighting term, what we talk about aerial are beams out in the air. We'll put haze in the air, and we'll use focused fixtures such as a hard edge light with gobos to put aerial patterns in the air. Now, those patterns could be patterns of shapes of light from the beams, or it could be a pattern of multiple beams positioned in a particular manner. And when you're working as a programmer or a designer, you might say, oh, I need a really great aerial focus here. And what that means is that the light is not pointing at a specific point on stage, but is pointing out in the air to create a look as it hits the particulates in the air. So that is what an aerial look tends to be. One of my favorite effects in a moving light is an animation wheel. Animation wheels are a lot of fun because it's basically an oversized gobo that is larger than the gate or the optical system of the light. And now you're only seeing part of the image pass through. And this gives you a really cool effect. It could be a rain effect, a water effect, fire, ripples, all kinds of different things, depending on what patterns are on your animation wheel. Now, animation wheels actually originally started out before moving lights. There were specific projectors made with big animation discs, and they were rather large discs. And again, it was a hard edge type unit, and you could control the thing moving forward and backwards and control the different speed of that animation disc. Most of those have gone away because now moving lights have animation wheels. Some animation wheels, like in the Martin Encore and in the Mac 3, we have the ability to actually move where they are positioned within the optical system that allows you to not only move the animation in one direction up and down, but also you could change it to move side by side, which is very useful for water and cloud type effects. So having an adjustable animation wheel makes it even that much more powerful in an automated light. And then our last A starting word is ArtNet. Now this term, ArtNet, is a Ethernet-based system that helps you distribute DMX across Ethernet. It was originally created by Artistic License back in 1998, and it's not a ratified standard, but is rather more of an open source type thing that anyone can make use of. And it originally, when it first came out, it worked with only 40 universes of DMX. And that was a lot at the time when most people were using 1 or 2 universes, maybe 4 on a really big show. And now they have the ability to, over Ethernet, have 40 universes on one line over Ethernet. And that was pretty amazing in 1998. Nowadays, you can do over 32,000 universes with ArtNet. Really exciting. They've updated it a lot over the years. And ArtNet is a real solid system, again, to distribute DMX over Ethernet. So moving on to the letter B, I'm very partial to the letter B because Brad, my name starts with a B. What do you know? And I really like these words in the B as well, because these are some of the funnest words to say. Now there's more, but these are some of the funnest. Ballyhoo. I love ballyhoos. Ballyhoos are tons of fun. A ballyhoo is basically randomly moving beams of light around an area. It could be that you see the beams, particularly as you see in the image here, or it could just be you see the output of the light on something, say a curtain. So maybe on the front of a curtain, you have lights ballyhooing around. In fact, that's where the term originally came from. It began with a figure 8 of follow spots on a curtain. So before moving lights, there was a term for the spots to ballyhoo, and they would move around on the front of a curtain to give excitement before a show or even during a show. So you would ask the follow spots to ballyhoo on the curtain, and they would create that look. Nowadays, ballyhoos with moving lights are very easy to create. Pretty much you can hit one effect and it will create a ballyhoo, and you just adjust the size and location where the lights will move around. In the early days of moving lights, we had to hand build our ballyhoos and actually build each position and tell the lights to move from here to there to there. And it was rather tedious. But ballyhoos are fun to watch and fun to create as well. Another great B word is beamage. Beamage is more of a slang term of sorts. It's not an official word, if you will, but I love this term. And basically, it's similar to aerial, but beamage is just when you've got lots of beams of light that you want to see in the air. So you might talk to a designer and he says, in this song, I want to have a lot of beamage out over the audience. And that just means you want to put a lot of typically narrow beams, but it could be breakups of gobos or something. But beamage are lots of beams of light. Again, you need some haze in the air in order to see the beams of light. But it's a fun word. Blinder actually has two different terms we can talk about with blinder. Blinder basically was originally used, as you would expect, to blind the audience. And the term blinder meant that you would blind the audience to accomplish a scene change. So if you didn't have a front curtain on a theatrical show, you could blind the audience with a lot of light and then take that light away. And during that time, something different would happen on stage. Now that's moved on to dedicated fixtures, as you see here, the Rush Blinder 1 unit there. And what that does is that is just kind of like what was originally a Molfe, but this is an LED version. And they are used as blinding light. Typically in the concert world, they're put on a front of house truss or a front over the stage truss to blast out over the audience and illuminate the audience. Now it blinds the audience, but in many cases, it also allows the performer to see the audience. The other way the term blinder is often used is as a focus when you're focusing automated lights. You might push them out towards the audience and point it into the eyes of the audience for an effect, as you see in the background photo there. So a blinder focus means put all the lights out in an angle directly into the audience's eyes to give them that feel. And maybe you're not actually blinding them. Maybe you put in a gobo that isn't giving them that harsh light in their eyes, but that's just the name of a focus, a blinder focus. Breakup sounds like a really sad thing to do, as a relationship comes to an end. But that's not what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the fun part about a breakup, and that's a breakup gobo. A gobo, as we know, is something you put in a light to give you different images if it's a hard-edged light. And a breakup gobo is a type of gobo that gives a textured effect without a specific pattern. So basically, it could be random lines, it could be little shapes of pebbles, it could be many different things, but it just is, as it sounds like, it breaks up the solid output of the light into multiple pieces. And those pieces can be used for texture when lighting a person or a set piece, or those pieces could be used in the air to create really cool dynamic looks of beamage or aerial focuses. So breakup gobos are a lot of fun to work with that. And the other nice thing with breakup gobos is they can look very different if you put them in focus or out of focus. So breakup gobos are fun to work with. On most lighting consoles, you'll find bump buttons. Bump buttons are buttons that you can press, as you see here. That's Michael Keller actually pressing buttons live during a Black Sabbath show on the drum solo, and that's not a sped up video either. That was how fast he was playing those bump buttons. And typically a bump button was only active as long as the button is held down. And that's a really key feature on a lighting console, because as you hold the button down, it will affect a change on stage. And when you let go, it will release that change on stage and go back to a previous state. So for example, with a bump button, you could have intensity. Originally, it was to bump intensity to 100%. You could bump the intensity by hitting that button, and no matter what the fader was at, which you hit the bump button, intensity would go to 100%. You let go of that bump button, it'll go back to the value of the fader. Nowadays on automated lighting consoles, we can assign anything to a bump button. So you can assign color so that when you hit the bump button, all the lights turn blue, and when you let go, they go back to whatever color they were previously. And bump buttons are a lot of fun to play and to assign on lighting consoles. The last B word is busking. Now busking, you also make use of bump buttons a lot while you're busking, but busking is basically the term of creating lighting looks spontaneously in response to a performance. So this is where you have not pre-prepared, you don't have a cue list, maybe you don't know what the band's gonna play, maybe you're working a corporate event or a festival, and there's just a band on stage and you've got to start running lights for them. Well, this is typically referred to as busking. Some people might call it winging it, but busking is a really fun term that basically means making it up as you go along from the lighting standpoint. Now, you need to set up your console ahead of time for busking. So you need to have some things laid out, some bump buttons and faders that give you the ability to figure it out as you go along. Now, what I like about busking also is where that term comes from. Originally, it was a term more from the UK originally, but from various parts of the world as well. But it was a term that refers to musical performers in a non-performance venue who are trying to solicit money from passerbys. So when you think of going down to the subway or the tube and you see some performer down there playing his saxophone and he's got his hat out, that typically is a busker, and that person is busking, trying to earn money in this non-performance venue. At some point along the way, that term got pushed over into our industry and became something similar of making up a show as you go along and hopefully getting paid for it too. Again, other terms for busking might be winging it or punting, but typically most people use busking. All right. Excuse me. So moving right along. In the C, I really like to talk a lot about color rendering. If you've seen me talk on some other sessions or you've seen me live at Martin Road shows, you know color rendering is a very important thing. It is a metric to describe how well a white light source will allow the reproduction of color based on the source's spectrum. So in other words, if I have a light and it's a white light, the color rendering is a metric that'll tell me how well is that white light going to allow various colors to appear. And it's a really important metric that we need to all understand. And there's different systems for color rendering. And I really suggest if you want to learn more that you go back and look at my quality of light presentation that is available on the Martin Resources Learning Sessions page. And there you can find a very good description of the different methodologies and why you should never use CRI. Stay away from that. Look at TM30. The color rendering is an important metric that we use to help define white light. Cove is a fun word because it sounds like a really cool place, a cove, you know, maybe somewhere on the beach or something. But what a cove really means, it's an area in a venue ceiling that allows for a placement of lighting fixtures. Now, a cove could be as is shown here, that is up in a theater, up in above the rafters and kind of hidden away so the lights can shoot out through it. A cove could also be a little side pocket on a wall. It's used in many different ways. But typically a cove is an area where the lighting fixtures are more hidden away and typically up in a ceiling or along a wall. And there are even specific cove lights that are made in the architectural world to help with uplighting a wall. And so cove is a fun word. Crossfade is a very, very common word. Crossfade is something we do on every lighting production pretty much in some way or form. And it basically means it's the act of progressing through various DMX values to alter a parameter over time. So if I'm taking a fixture and I'm crossfading from 0 to 100% intensity over 5 seconds, the DMX values are increasing across 5 seconds. And that change in time is called a crossfade. It's crossing from 0 to 100. You could do that on any parameter for the most part, depending on your fixture. So it could be color crossfades, as you see in the image here. It could be crossfading from shutters from one angle to another. Could be many different things. But crossfade is a key element that we use when altering lighting parameters. And then there's the basic thing that is so important, and that is a queue. A queue is something where we put all of our fixture data in one container, if you will, typically stored on a lighting desk, although queues could be written out by hand and then manipulated live in the moment in some manner. So a queue doesn't have to be an instance on a lighting desk, but typically nowadays it is. And a queue contains all the data for your various fixtures and their parameters, whichever ones you want to alter. Now, originally, a queue is a term that is spelled differently with a Q-U-E, Q-U-E-U-E, I think that's right. It's hard to say in my head, but at any rate, you'll understand, which means a line. And a line, a lineup of people, or a queue line for an attraction, that's typically spelled with the letter Q. And in a sense, that's where this word originally came from, because it was a line of different things that you use for your lighting. Over time, that evolved, and it's more spelled with C-U-E, and that is a queue, is the basic tenement of a lighting look. Guess what? We're going to the letter D now. So starting in on D, we have dead hang. Now that sounds like something scary coming up for Halloween, but it's not. Don't worry, it's not that scary. Basically, a dead hang is a rigging point direct to a grid or a beam above a stage, not to a typical bar or a truss. So if you've got some location that you want to put a fixture, but you don't have a typical hanging point there, you don't have a batten or a truss or some other normal lighting position, then you have to figure out how to rig the light there and dead hang the light in that position. In this photo here, my friend Luther Frank had to dead hang a fixture on a beam in this performance space because there was no lighting position. So he had to figure out how to hang the light on that beam directly right there. We also use dichroics throughout lighting fixtures. Dichroic is basically a really great system where you take glass and you coat it in a big chamber. A laser will hit a certain chemical, heat it up, and that chemical will go up and rise onto the glass, and the glass will be coated. Once the glass is coated, now it becomes like a filter where only certain wavelengths of light will pass through that piece of glass. And that allows you to have a piece of glass that, for instance, takes white light and allows only magenta wavelengths to pass through. And that's how we change colors in moving lights. We have dichroic pieces of glass inside. It's very durable and can attain a high heat and not degrade over time. However, dichroic glass has another property, and that is that while it's allowing, say, that example of all the wavelengths to only allow magenta to pass through, they also are reflecting back all the other wavelengths, all the wavelengths that don't fit the magenta. And that can cause problems in an optical system. Plus, one more interesting property of dichroic filters, is that as you angle them, you can change what wavelengths are passing through. Now, a different brand called Verilight made use of this a long time ago in the classic VL5 fixture, where they used Dichrotune was their technology that would turn the blades of dichroics and actually change the color or the hue coming out of that filter. So dichroic filters have a lot of different uses. And incidentally, they were originally created and developed by NASA for space visors and for protection on spacecraft on the windows. So dichroics are really fun and really cool things that we use in our industry. Dimmer Beach is a great term. Sounds like somewhere you want to go on vacation. You want to go hang out at Dimmer Beach. Well, I don't know if you want to hang out there on vacation. Dimmer Beach is an area near the stage that's occupied by dimmer racks and associated power distribution equipment, typically for a touring or festival type performance or other one-off type performance. And what this is originally a lot of shows had dimmers. They had conventional lights, and you had to have big racks of dimmers to adjust the power or the electricity going to your fixtures. And where all these cables landed down from the rig was kind of like landing in an area, and it became known as the dimmer beach. I don't know who or when that term was coined, but that was kind of known. Well, nowadays, shows don't have that many dimmers. They have racks and racks of distribution, power distribution, and breakers and things, but that term still sticks around, and we still call it dimmer beach, although it's not really dimmers there anymore. Now, I couldn't have this presentation and not talk about DMX512. DMX512 is the industry standard protocol that we use for controlling our lighting products. Now, of course, there are many other, well, not many, but there are a few other protocols that can be put to use. But overall, DMX512 is the standard because it's very robust and very simple system. Now, it was made official in 1986, and it again is the main protocol. Originally, it was created for dimmers, so it allowed you to dim up and down from 0 to 100 to your dimmers. But over time, as moving lights were developed, it was applied to moving lights and their various parameters. It does lead to some problems because of some limitations of 512 channels of 256 points of control on each channel. But we found ways around that by tying them together and doing 16-bit and various other methods. Now, someday will DMX512 be replaced with a different protocol? I hope so. I hope something better comes along, but it's going to be tough. And we tried at one point in the industry to change it with ACN, but that didn't really take off. So DMX512 is the current standard that we use in controlling fixtures. Downlight is a great look. Downlight is a look when you have a light focused straight up or straight above the performers and you point it straight down at them. And downlight is a fascinating look. It really changes the face and the shadows on a performer or on an object, and it can be a very dramatic look. And it's used quite often by a lot of lighting designers to give those moments. You'll see it in dance and theater in particular, sometimes also in concerts, but more often in theater and dance. Now, of course, we have to talk a little bit about our stage directions. If you're working anywhere in production, you need to be aware of various stage positionings and things because that's the language that we speak. And downstage is the part of the stage nearest to the audience, typically. It could also, if you're in the round, it's hard to say what's downstage, but it's typically the area closest to the front edge of the stage, and it's also closest to the audience. And it's called downstage because originally, if you think of a raked stage, which is an angled stage that were common, still used some in theater, that was the lowest part. So it was down, so it was called downstage. And as you see here, I've placed the lighting fixture in that image on the downstage edge of that shot. So moving into the E's. In the US, we have a term we call Edison because of Thomas Edison. We call an Edison plug or even an Edison cable in some terms. And it's basically a plug that has two prongs and a ground. So it'll have three metal contacts, and it's typically a round plug with those prongs as that. And this is called an Edison plug here in the US. In other parts of the world, you might not even use that type of connector. But if you might be on a production in the States or in North America, and someone might say, I need an Edison cable over here. And that typically means something with this type of plug or connector on it. Ellipsoidal is a type of fixture that it's kind of interesting because it's changed over time, but an ellipsoidal is originally named because of the reflector that was placed in the light. And this is a hard edge type light, and it had an elliptical shaped reflector that the lamp pushed through the center, and it reflected the light into an optical system, still does, I should say, with at least one lens. And it's also known as an elliptical reflector spotlight, or ERS. Now, these have been very common for many years in all different types of production. You can have shutters, you can project gobos. I'm sure everybody's made use of them. There is a more slang term for it that's called LECO. It came from a Strand product originally. Also nowadays, ETC has their product called Source 4, so some people might just call them Source 4s. But what I also find interesting about ellipsoidal, it's a fun word to say and spell, of course, but also ellipsoidal has changed. We now have LED-based ellipsoidals. Well, kind of. We have LED-based fixtures that look like an ellipsoidal and behave like an ellipsoidal, but they don't actually have an elliptical reflector in them anymore. They have their LED source in the back and an optical system that works with it. So although we call them LED ellipsoidals, they're not really ellipsoidals anymore, but you could argue they are because they use used for the same purpose. Kind of fun. Encoders are something that we find in two different avenues. So number one, if you're working on a lighting console, you'll have an encoder, which is a round knob on the console that allows you to change and dial different parameters or different functions of the desk. So you can reach up and touch that encoder and move it. And as you move it, it sends an electrical signal through the console and allows you to adjust, say, pan or tilt or intensity of whatever parameter that encoder is tied to. Alternately, it might adjust something on the screen. It might scroll the screen forward and backwards or up and down. Encoders are very useful for human tactile input, and we all like to have lots of encoders on our lighting consoles. But our moving lights also have encoders in them. And then the encoder actually counts movement. So when you're moving and panning a fixture, an encoder is a tool similar to what you see in the image there. It's a little round thing with cutouts. There's many different ways to do it, but that cutout rotates along with it, and electronically, the fixture can count and know where it is positioned. Otherwise, you just have a motor moving, and it doesn't really know its position. Now, have you ever seen a moving light on stage that's powered on, and maybe you push it, and it moves as you push it, and then it goes back to its position that it was previously in? And that's because there's an encoder. And when you've pushed it manually yourself, it's looking at and knowing, oh, I've moved 16 positions on my encoder, and then it can move itself back 16 positions to be back to where it should be. So you'll find encoders generally on pan and tilt, sometimes on gobo wheels, and other places in moving lights. Étendue, I like to talk about étendue. It's not talked about a whole lot in our industry, but étendue is a very important process in optical design. So manufacturers have optical designers that are designing the optical system of your moving light or your fixed fixture, and they always have to consider étendue of the source. And what that is étendue comes from a French word that means to spread. So they'll look at the lamp source, if it's a lamp, or the LED engine, and see how is the light spreading out from the engine. And they want to grab as much of that spread of the output into the optical system. If you spread the light too wide and your optical system is smaller, you're going to miss some of the output. So the étendue has to always be figured out, and you want to capture as much of that spread through your optical system. And that's where the optical designers make use of étendue. And then there's eye candy. Eye candy is great. Eye candy is a term that we use to refer to lighting equipment or looks that are good for the audience or the camera, but they don't actually do anything and provide any light or light source for the performance. Yes, sometimes they do, they can use them for that, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about people looking directly at a lighting fixture or cameras looking directly at a lighting fixture and looking for that effect on the face of the fixture. That's typically called eye candy. So here you see the Aura PXL, the brand new Martin light, doing its eye candy effect with the individual pixels. As we've moved into the LED world, we see lots of different fixtures that have various eye candy type effects, and they're used all the time to add excitement and dynamic effects to a stage that isn't really doing any illumination, but it's creating art on the front of the fixtures, and that's eye candy. Moving on. Fat finger. This is a fun term because it's a problem that can happen. Do you have fat fingers? I don't know. We'll find out when you are on a lighting console. What fat finger is a common problem among lighting operators when two buttons are accidentally pressed at the same time by a finger that's too large for the buttons or positioned in the wrong way. So for example, you might go to type fixture 105 at full, and as you type 105, maybe you're hitting the 4 along with the 5. So you end up typing fixture 1045 at full. And now you've fat fingered, you made a mistake. And of course, if you don't have a fixture 1045, it's not going to illuminate, or the wrong fixture might come on. And so you might, if you're the programmer, then say, oh, sorry, I fat fingered that, let me back up. It can also happen on bump buttons. It can happen in any way in which you accidentally hit a button that you didn't intend. Is called fat finger. Feeder is a term that we use for various cable runs that is basically the main power back to an installation. So feeder is not something that the people at catering, but it is actually the cables that we run back to the main hookup. And then from there, it might go into a distro or something. And you might have very large cables because they're carrying large amounts of electricity. And there's also certain rules to feeders, how you want to lay them out, how you coil them. Sometimes they get real dirty, the feeder runs, and it's it's heavy and it's hard work to run feeder cables. So when you're out doing it and you're told, hey, you need to go run the feeder cable, know that that's going to be a big job. Festoon is another great lighting term that's just fun to say. Festoon sounds like a party, right? Well, in a sense it is, because what it is a festoon is a chain or length of cable that has many different lamp holders on it, and typically it's used in outdoor party lighting. A lot of people put it in their yards. Now you can get them with multiple pixels inside each one, or they could just be incandescent lamps. And what we see is this is used quite often in theatrical productions and in concerts even, because it gives a great random look on stage. They might fly in a whole set of festoons above the stage. And this originally comes from a decorative chain of flowers hung between 2 points. And it evolved over time from flowers to lighting products. And it is a really nice element that's used in a lot of productions. In the US, when we're looking at how bright something is, how much light's falling on a source, we measure that in foot candles. And foot candles basically is the illumination of 1 square foot surface of which there's a uniformly distributed flux of 1 lumen. And what that means is it's equal to 1 lumen per square foot. So if you think about how much light is hitting a surface, you'll measure that, or a person's face or a location on stage. You'll measure that with a light meter, and we'll get a number which will be in FC foot candles. And that tells us how bright, how much light is hitting that area. For those of you in other parts of the world, as a reference, 1 foot candle is equal to 10.76 lux. Fresnels are common lenses. Some people like to joke around, I do, and I like to joke around and call it Fresnel, but that's not correct. The correct pronunciation is Fresnel. And it actually comes from Augustin Jean Fresnel back in the late 1700s. He invented lenses for lighthouses, and he invented this lens that had circular ridges in it. And actually, if you go to a museum in Paris, there's a Museum of Technology, you can see some of his early experiments with Fresnel lenses with his name on it. And these are typically used in stage lights to produce an even soft edge beam of light. And you'll find Fresnels on all different types of wash lights. And there's even a product of fixture called a Fresnel light because it has the Fresnel lens on the front. And you can adjust it from spot to wash. You can adjust the Fresnel product as well. Now, frost is a diffusing filter that's used to soften the edges of a lighting beam. So designers will use frost in either a fixed light or in an automated light to just soften the edge so that it's not quite as harsh. You still get the essence of where the light is, but it softens it up. So you can take a hard edge image as you see here, and you can soften it. There's different levels of frost. Frost can also be different media that you put in a gel frame to soften a light, just to get rid of those hard edges. Really is a nice tool to use. And a lot of moving lights, again, now have variable frost, or from the moving light or from your desk, you can adjust different frost blades that come in and out, and you can go from soft to heavy frost and crossfade in and out the frost. G, we're on to G already. So a gate, the gate is not the thing that is over here on my fence into my backyard, but the gate is actually a very important part of a lighting fixture. The gate is the area in which the focus of an optical system can be achieved. So for example, there's a point where within the optical system where you can actually focus on items. And that's where gobos and shutters are typically positioned. So framing shutters, gobos, animation wheels, there's a certain location in that optical system that's ideal for being able to focus on that. And that's called the gate. Sometimes there's also certain pieces of metal put into a moving light that form the round circle, that's actually the gate as well. That tells you the gate size of how much light's going into that optical system. That'll be built in. The iris might be there. And in some cases, the color mixing is actually placed in the gate. Typically, it's placed just outside of the gate so that it won't be in focus. But in some systems, you can actually get to a point with your focus where you can focus down in on the color mixing system. And that just depends. But the gate is the area where focus can be achieved. Now, this next term is not actually a word. It stands for something. It's Global Device Type Format, GDTF. And GDTF is new. This is a new term that came about in the last 2 years or so. And basically what it is you can think of it as a container. It's a format that contains fixture information that is easily shared between CAD systems, visualizers, and consoles. What we've had in our industry, unfortunately, we have had a problem for many, many years that lighting consoles and visualizers and even CAD systems each need to identify and understand the functions of moving lights, of complex lights. They need to know things like the DMX protocol, what different channels do different things. They need to know the size and weight of fixtures. They need to know which way it orients and the output. All those things are important. And gathering all that data from various manufacturers and getting it in these systems has been very tough. And I'm sure if you've done anything, you've had to get a fixture library, and maybe you've even experienced a fixture library that was incorrect and it didn't allow access to functions. So GDTF has been created to help with that. And hopefully this global device type format, the idea is that the manufacturers will create the file and it'll be shared out. And then every system that makes use of that file will have the same data. So now if you draw on your CAD system with using a GDTF library for a fixture, it will have the proper information of the size and weight of the fixture. They'll make use of that. Your visualizer will know the output and the protocol of how it works, as will your lighting desk, and they'll all work perfectly together and correct. And GDTF is getting started. Martin is a partner. We are having GDTF files created for our products, and we're excited about the future of GDTF. Ghost light, again, we're getting close to Halloween, and ghost light sounds like something scary, and it's not really scary, but ghost lights are important things, come from the theater world. And basically it's a light that's left turned on and placed on the center of a stage to keep bad spirits away overnight while the theater's closed, and really also for safety, because lighting systems in theaters are complex, and it's hard to somebody just to walk in the day or in the night, say a cleaning person, and flip a switch and be able to see. So in solving for that, there's a ghost light, which is typically one bulb on a stand, and it has a very unique look that many people follow the same look. But a ghost light can also be just an installed fixture above a stage. It could be on a batten that's turned on at night and stays on all night long. But typically it's something that's carried out, set there, and left on. And again, there's also some beliefs that it keeps the bad spirits away overnight in the theater. Grandmaster is something that appears on pretty much all lighting consoles, but not every lighting console. And a Grandmaster is a primary fader on a desk that will adjust the intensity for all playbacks and functions on the desk. So if your Grandmaster is down at 0, there's no intensity output from your desk. So Grandmaster will be the main override of all intensities on the desk, no matter what you're doing, whether you're activating in your programmer or you're playing back cues. That's why it's called the Grandmaster. Interestingly enough, it's also the name of an original huge lighting control system or light board that was made by Strand back in 1931 called the Grandmaster. Rob Halliday recently did a learning session called In the Co-Pilot Seat, and he talks about and even shows that original 1931 Grandmaster controller. Ground row is a really interesting thing because this is another one that has two different methodologies or two different terms, definitions, that's what I'm trying to say, two different definitions of this term. Now, a ground row can be a row of lights that are placed on the ground, typically up near a cyc, and uplight that cyc or the backdrop. And ground row can also be referred to a scenic piece that's placed in front of those lights that helps hide the fixtures so you don't see the fixtures. A ground row could be a hard piece of wood or other fabric that helps hide those lighting fixtures that are doing that uplighting. There are also ground row specific fixtures that are sold by different companies, such as Altman and ETC, that sell these ground row products that are designed for uplighting. You place them on the ground and they shoot up into the set piece or the site. We're on to the H's. Highest takes precedence, or HTP. This is a really important term that you need to know if you're going to be involved in any type of lighting control. HTP is used, and what it means is that the higher numeric value, one higher numeric value overrides any lower numeric value for that same parameter. Typically, it's used for intensities. So for example, If I put my fixture, I tell it to be at 80%, that's the highest. If I now tell it to go to 70%, if I've got a fader that's telling it to be at 80, that precedence of the highest is going to take precedence. It's going to be always at 80. If I tell it to be at 90, now that's the highest, and that's going to take precedence, not the one that's at 80. And it's very useful, especially if you've got various highlights you're doing, such as a lectern or a podium or different specials. And highest takes precedence is again used generally for intensities, but sometimes it's used for other parameters such as color. And you'll see that in the Martin Mac Aura PXL, we have a new system of how we interact with the pixels and using HTP, or highest takes precedence, for color. Home is where I'm at right now, not in this fancy library you see behind me, but I am at my home. But home is also a term that has two different meanings. Typically, we use it for home will mean put the fixtures in their default position. So the home position of the light, most cases, is a what we call 50-50 position, meaning 50% pan and 50% tilt, which typically will be pointing straight down. However, a home position could be defined in the default values of a console, so you could point your light, say, downstage center, and say that that's its home position. So it doesn't have to be 50-50. Also, there were some previous lights by another manufacturer that would, when you tell them to reset or to calibrate, that term was called home. So when you wanted to reset the light, reset all of its mechanics, you would say, I need to home the light. So sometimes that term is still used today by people who say, instead of saying they need to reset or calibrate the fixture, they'll say they need to home the light. And basically it's for the same reason, because you're resetting it mechanically back to its default positions for each and every parameter. So that's where the term home came from for that as well. Hookup sounds like something people do on a Friday or Saturday night, but actually a hookup is a piece of paper or a sheet, a spreadsheet. And what it means is it's something that details your patch and much, much more. So a hookup sheet will give you lots of information. It'll tell you where the fixtures are patched and their DMX addresses. It'll also tell you what their purpose is, and it'll tell you how they're circuited, where they're plugged into. So a hookup sheet gives you lots of information like that. Moving on to hotspot. Hotspot sounds like a great place to go for that date on a Friday or Saturday night and hope for a hookup. Yeah. No, but a hotspot is actually a portion of an output that is brighter in the center, or it doesn't have to be the center, it could be elsewhere, but typically it's in the center. It's the portion of the output of a light that is brighter than the rest of it. And that hotspot can be useful, or it can also be annoying. It depends how you want to look at it. Some people find a hotspot very inefficient because the output of the light is brighter in the center and there's a lot of fall off. But at other times, people want a little bit of hotspot and they don't want a flat, even field so that they can overlap fixtures together to make a wash. So it's really up to the designer and its individual preference, whether you like a hotspot or not. Now, this is a word you may or may not have heard of, but it's a very important word called hysteresis. Say that 3 times fast, hysteresis. What hysteresis technically means is it's the dependence of the state of a system based on its history. And it's used a lot when you look into electronics and you look into motors and things, and that's where it refers to in our industry as well. When we have a moving light, you have to consider hysteresis. Now, you might not have ever considered it, but it is important. I'm going to tell you where you'll find hysteresis problems, and that's in positioning. What hysteresis means is that the way that electronic waves work with a motor could be different depending where a fixture came from previously. So for example, if I'm pointing my fixture to down center stage and I start with it over here and then I move it to down center stage, I've defined that's the value of electronically from this side of the stage to center stage. Now later on, if I come from the opposite side of the stage to down center stage to that same position, it might not be exactly the same point on its little motor, so it might be slightly off. And that's because electronically we've come from a different direction. So instead of coming from this side of the stage to center, we came from this side of the stage. So it might be slightly off. And that degree that it's off is called hysteresis. If you've ever read any of Mike Wood's reviews of lighting fixtures, he will actually tell you the hysteresis offset of the fixture, how far off it can be. And it's important because if you've got a throw that's 130 feet throw of your lighting output, a little bit of hysteresis might make a big difference. So this is something that can happen when you position a fixture and you come from an opposite area or a different position back to that main position. It's called hysteresis. I hope that makes sense. It's a hard concept. All right, so moving into I. Incandescent. Incandescent is where we got started in lighting, really. There were some other things before, but incandescent lights really took off strongly. And it's typically a light source consisting of a metal filament, usually tungsten, which glows while hot when current is passed through it. So we all know what tungsten lights are. Tungsten lights, a lot of people like the tungsten look. Typically, they have around a 3,000, 3,200 Kelvin color temperature field to them or output to them. So that's what incandescent is. And nowadays, incandescent's kind of changed to be not just talking about what the source is, but it's actually a look. So a designer might talk about, I want an incandescent look here. And basically they're meaning they want a 3,000 Kelvin color temperature out of the look. Also, there are LED fixtures that will emulate incandescent capabilities or looks through color temperature and also through how they dim as well. Inhibitive is a type of special playback that will remove parameters from subsequent playbacks. It's similar to a custom grandmaster, if you will, in which you can dim down selected fixtures on a single fader. So for example, I can assign my upstage truss onto an inhibitive fader for intensity. Now, as I dim that down, it behaves as like a mini grandmaster just for the upstage truss. So if I've dimmed that down, whatever value they were at before, they will be dimmed down at a percentage. So if I have that fader at 50%, if the lights were told to be at 90% in the previous cue, they'll be down at half of that because the inhibitive sub. So inhibitive subs are very useful types of things you can use on your lighting programming. Something that really drives light is called the inverse square law. And this is something that was defined a long, long time ago. We won't go into the history of that too far, but it's used to determine the fall off or the distance of illumination of a subject as it moves closer or further from a light source. And we can make use of the inverse square law to understand how bright something will be at a distance or as you get closer or further from the light source. And basically you need to remember that doubling the distance, so you double the distance from the light source, you're going to reduce the illumination by 1/4. So the further out you go, it's going to get dimmer and dimmer and dimmer further away. And that's due to the inverse square law. And that's how you can calculate your intensities at different distances from your light source. Irises. Irises are great things. It's an adjustable aperture, which when you place it in the gate of a fixture, varies the size of the beam of the light. So you can take a really wide output and narrow it down with an iris. And irises can be mechanical, manual controlled. You can put that into an ellipsoidal, or you can commonly put that into moving lights, or they can also be in follow spots as well and be manual. In moving lights, we find them with motors attached, so we can do iris effects and move the iris in and out very rapidly or slowly and create exciting and dynamic looks with an iris. So continuing through the alphabet onto the letter J, we have jumpers. Jumpers are basically an extension cable. So someone might say, oh, I need a jumper over here. I need a 20-foot jumper over here to plug in. And basically it means something that just has a male and a female connector on it so that you can jump or extend the length of a cable. So that's typically how a jumper is used. In some parts of the world, it also can mean an adapter of one type of connector to another. So maybe you need a jumper to jump from, let's say, a True 1 adapt plug to a PowerCon plug, or True 1 to an Edison. Some people refer to that as a jumper, to jump from one type of plug to another. But more commonly, it's used to mean similar to an extension cable. Junction box is a term that we find a lot of use with as well. It can mean an electrical outlet if we're talking about electricity and a junction box, say in your house. Or more commonly, we'll find a special device that will take several inputs, several different types of inputs, and puts them into a single output. For example, with the VDO atomic dot, we have this junction box as you see here, and it will take power in through a True 1 connector, and either Ethernet or DMX in through an XLR, and then output that through one single cable type. So it's the junction box that's doing that conversion for you. Okay, let's move on to K. I already mentioned briefly Kelvin. Kelvin is the typical unit of measure we use for color temperature. And it was invented long, long time ago by Lord Kelvin as he observed a piece of metal heating up over time. And as it heated up, he saw it change colors as it got hotter. And he defined what we call the Kelvin color temperature scale. And typically, lower color temperatures are what we call warmer, so more in that brownish looking range or reddish. And then cooler color temperatures are the hotter color temperatures, or the higher numbers that are more bluish in color. And again, you can learn more about color temperature in my quality of light presentation. Key light is a great term. It sounds like some sort of special fixture that you have on your keychain or something, but a key light is the dominant light source or direction of light in a naturalistic lighting state. Now, key light, the term, is used most often in television and film, but people will use it also in theater and in various concerts and things as well. And in a theatrical example, a key light might represent light coming from a window from one side of a set. So for example, if you have a window over here on your set, you're going to have the key light or the key lighting, the brighter light coming from that side as well to match the look of that window, the sunlight coming through that window. And a key light is very useful in television to help give that depth on the face, because you want to measure you want to sculpt the face when you're showing people on television, and having a key light and a fill light helps you do that. Kill sounds mean, and it is. It means to turn off or black out a fixture. So you might have an LD say, kill channel 42, and that means turn it off, black it out. But you need to be careful. Some LDs will actually refer to kill or even use the term off, and you need to understand, do they mean black it out, or do they mean kill it, as in get rid of it in this queue? So there's a difference, and it depends how your designer or whoever you're working with speaks. So it's important to define that term and how they will use kill or off to mean, do they want the zero value written in the queue, or do they want it removed completely from that queue? Now, kit is interesting. Kit is a term that, as I understand, comes more from the UK originally. And what it means is it's basically describing all your gear. So someone might say, what's in your lighting kit? And that means, what kind of gear do you have? In the US, we have a different term that we'll use quite often, but the kit is referring to all of your fixtures and the associated gear to go along with it. So that's your lighting kit. Moving into the L's, a ladder, a lighting ladder, if you will, is a non-climbable structure in the shape of a ladder from which fixtures can be hung in a vertical orientation or stack. Now, ladders can be flown. Typically, they can be dead hung from a truss, remember dead hung, or they can be flown on their own up and down. But ladders are great for giving you different types of positions of your lighting fixtures. Sometimes you'll find them in theater in the wings to do side lighting. Sometimes you'll find them in concerts along the back wall, but ladders are really great structures for hanging fixtures on. Earlier, I talked about HTP, or highest takes precedence. The alternate to that is latest takes precedence. And that's really a very common thing on particularly automated lighting consoles. And basically it means the most recently played item overrides all other parameters. So the latest thing that you've played takes precedence. Doesn't matter if it's the highest value or not. So for example, if you have something that's set at 80% and then you play something to be at 40%, the latest is going to take precedence, and the light's going to dim down to 40%. And latest takes precedent is very, very useful, even with bump buttons that I referred to earlier. So for example, in the cue that's playing in this little video here, you could press the bump button that changes those fixtures to magenta. And as you press it, they'll change to magenta, latest takes precedence, and then you let go of that and it goes back to the previous look, which is they're more of an amber color. Depending how you set up your desk, you also need to take care that things don't get deactivated, but that's separate. Again, latest takes precedence is a key thing in lighting consoles. Light curtains are cool. Basically, it's a linear configuration of lighting fixtures or fixture elements in a linear configuration pointed downward. Doesn't typically straight down, but it could also be downstage-ish. Doesn't have to be straight down. So narrow beam lamps are typically used for this, and a curtain of light is defined. Again, if you have haze in the air, you can really see that curtain coming across. And there was a product originally called the light curtain from a company called DHA, and it was very popular and very used in a lot of Broadway and various theatrical productions for a long time. Now we see other different bar type products used that can create light curtains as well. And it's fun too, because a lot of them now can move as well, and the DHA could move as well. A loom is something we use a lot in touring and sometimes in theater, but more often in touring type things. And it's a neatly organized bunch of cable. Typically, they're all tied together in some form, either with tape put around them or sometimes with some tie strings. But basically, if you know you need to run cables from one location to another, you'll create a loom. For tours, quite often, a loom will include power and data and other cables all running from a distro location, tied together. It goes up to the truss and then out and along the truss, breaking out to its various positions as needed. And looms are very useful because it keeps those cables bundled together nicely and also allows ease of setup and teardown of those multiple cables. Lumen is the measure of light output from the source itself. It could be directly from a light bulb or the output from the front of the light. So lumen is the measure of the light output from a source. And it tells you how much light is coming out. And it can be measured in one of two methods, either directly from the looking at what it's shining onto and using, not what it's shined onto, but where it's shining to, and using different calculations with light meters, or it can be put into a big calculating sphere in which they measure all the light that's coming out of that fixture. And lumens are the general basis that we use to define how bright lights are. Earlier, I talked about foot candles, and in the rest of the world, people use the term lux and the general measurement called lux. And again, this is measuring the measure of light on a surface or a face or somewhere. And this is 1 lumen spread over 1 meter. And again, to reference, 1 lux is equal to 0.93 foot candles. And that's the typical measurement we use in most parts of the world other than the US. On to the M's. A magic sheet originally was a simplistic version of a light plot used by a lighting designer so that they could see most everything on one sheet or one page. So a lighting designer, particularly in theater, would use a magic sheet instead of their plot to have little call outs of these are the side lights, these are the down lights, these are the overhead lights, and they could then quickly look at that and call to their lighting programmer the channels they wanted. And it still does, they still make use of that, many lighting designers. But it's also now a function on lighting consoles. Sometimes it's called a magic sheet or a layout view or a plot view. And it allows easy and quick selection of the fixtures. So the fixtures are laid out on the screen exactly as they're laid out on stage, or even in a condensed manner that allows for quick selection. And magic sheets on consoles now will also give you a lot of feedback information, intensity values, color, gobo, it'll give you all of that. And a lot of lighting designers are now moving over to electronic magic sheets that are connected to the console so they can get that data along with quick, easy selection. Mark is a great term, and it's not the guy holding the guitar in that photo. What mark is it's a special kind of cue that will preset all the parameters of a fixture before it fades up. And this is very important because, for example, if I have a fixture and it's pointing over here on this side of the stage and it fades out, and then I want it to come up on this side of the stage over here, well, what's going to happen? I need to have that fixture move in black, if you will, so it's preset. Otherwise, if I just crossfade 5 seconds after it faded up, you're going to see it moving and fading up. And that's probably not the desired effect. So you need a mark cue that in the black, in between where it faded out and where it's going to fade up, it actually moves and changes colors and iris and gobo or whatever it needs to do. Now, in the old days, we used to build mark cues, and many programmers still do build manual mark cues or build their own mark cues, but most desks have a move in black or auto mark type feature that is very handy and very useful to make use of. Meat rack sounds like something you'd find at a barbecue restaurant, and maybe you do, but typically this is a heavy-duty wheeled rack with inbuilt supports for bars or that helps with transporting large numbers of fixtures or even pre-rigged lights. So a meat rack, as you see here, is something that can have lots and lots of ellipsoidals on it, or lots of pars, or maybe even lots of moving lights. And this is a great way to move them around a shop and onto a truck, and then back out into a venue. Meat racks are very useful. Multi-cables are great. Multi-cables are something that is a flexible electric cable that has a number of different circuits that can be carried down one single piece of cable. So for example, you might have something that has 20 different lighting circuits in it. You can find multi-cables though for power or data on either method. Commonly in power, you'll find Sockapex type connectors, that's a brand, but multi-cables are very useful because they can carry multiple circuits or multiple lines of data in one cable. And often at the end, you'll find a breakout where it breaks out into multiple connectors as well. Now here's another new term called MVR. What MVR stands for is My Virtual Rig. And this is fairly new, another one of these new terms. And this works hand in hand with GDTF files. And what MVR does is it gives you this, again, I'm going to call it a container. It packages the GDTF files of all of your lighting fixtures as they are associated in your design. So it has the 3D model, and it helps describe not just the fixtures, but where they're placed in a 3D model. So it tells you where they're positioned and maybe other elements in that 3D world, such as set pieces and things. And the MVR file allows you to transfer now between your CAD, your previs, and your console, more than just the fixture libraries, but the actual complete layout. And if you make a change on your console, you can then take that same file and have it adapt into your visualizer and your CAD system without having to make the change in all three places. So MVR is a new type of container that packages all this information together. Now it's just getting started, so hopefully it'll be something that we see continue and become very useful in the industry. Looking at the ends, there's a neutral density filter. And this is a filter which reduces the brightness or intensity of a light source without changing its color value. So they tend to look kind of grayish in different types of color. And neutral density filters you'll find used in television quite a lot. Sometimes you'll see them in fall spots because it doesn't affect the color value, that color rendering we're talking about. It just brings down the intensity. And neutral density filters are very useful if you don't have a dimmer or if you just want to bring down a source without affecting it. Non-dim is an important type of circuit that only switches on and off, that is not capable of dimming. So if you have a conventional rig or you have dimmers in a theater, you want to make use of a non-dim for any electronic device that's going to plug into that. That could be LED fixtures, it's definitely moving lights, could be fans, could be different things, but you don't want to plug electronics into a dimming circuit because the way dimming circuits work, that could cause a problem, even if you never dim it, but particularly if you do dim it. So non-dim basically gives you the ability to set something where it can only turn on or off. You can also, in lighting consoles, often change desk channels to be non-dim channels so that it's impossible from your lighting desk to do anything except 0 or 100%. Oh boy, we're on to the O's. We're getting there. So, off stage, this is the direction away from center stage. So a designer might say, move the focus of that off stage right a little bit. And that tells you, go away from center towards stage right. Also in the picture that I've shown here, you can see there are fixtures that are literally placed off the stage. They're right along the side of the stage. So those would be the off stage fixtures, or off stage right, or off stage left. That's a common term that you'll hear often. Open white is also a term that we refer to that means a fixture with no color and often with no other effects in the light path. So a designer might say, put that fixture in open white. And what they probably mean is not just get rid of the color, but get rid of all the other effects within the fixture. Now you need to be clear if you're the programmer and understand what they mean, because if you get rid of the gobos and the framing shutters and they wanted to see the fixture with no color, that could be a problem. So it's good to define with the people you're working with what they mean by open white. But typically open white means no color, and it could also mean with no other effects as well. Pantograph is another one of those words that I just like to say and to talk about. And pantograph, originally it was used in a studio, or still is used in television or in photo studios. And it's basically a device that can stack itself up and down and be adjusted in height. So you can grab the light and move it up or down and position it where you want. Well, that's a manual kind, but there are pantographs that are electronic. And these are seen quite often, well, not quite often, but every once in a while in concerts. And in concert, they're used so that you can move the lights up and down in position. And it gives a really cool industrial look as you kind of see those different shapes of the pantograph itself. Interestingly, pantograph comes from a Greek term, which is a mechanical linkage that they use to link in a similar manner with those crisscrosses, so that you could write something or draw something on one sheet and it would reproduce copies on a second or third or multiple sheets of paper. So that was what it originally came from. But then that same shape could be used to make something that enlarges and collapses. And that's what a pantograph is. And it's a really great look for a lot of shows. Park is probably where I'm going to go after this presentation and sit outside. It's a nice day in the park. But that's not the park I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about here is a console function that allows you to set a channel or a fixture or a parameter to a particular level and leave it there and prohibit all other control of it. So for example, I could take a fixture and I could point it over here on one side of the stage, over on stage right, and point it right where maybe somebody is working on a set piece and put it in open white. Then I could say park. Now, no matter what else I'm doing, that fixture is locked in at that value in that location. So now if I'm adjusting color or I'm playing back cues, that one fixture is going to sit over there in full intensity, open white in that position. So maybe that person on stage can still see. Park is very useful in many different ways throughout productions. You might park the hazers on, or you might park various things from time to time. It's also very important if you're operating a desk to know what is parked and how to unpark. Make sure you know that, because if you've accidentally parked something, or if that person over there stage right is finished, you want to unpark it so that light goes back to doing what it's been told to do. A plot typically is a drawing that will show how the lighting rig should be put together. So a lighting plot is something that people will create, designers will create, that will show where the fixtures should be located in the rig. Also, plot in some parts of the world actually means to put together the lighting looks. So the designer might say, I'm plotting Q5, or we need to plot Q27. So it can actually mean to put together the lighting look, as opposed to just meaning the piece of paper. A preset is another one of those very important things. It's also called a palette, but very important for lighting consoles. A preset is a reference. So you store a preset, maybe put your lights down center stage, that's a position preset. And then when you write your cues or plot your cues, as you write those cues, you're storing not that the fixtures are at position 27 pan and 38 tilt, you're storing that they are referencing the down center stage preset. So now all of your cues will be referencing that preset. If you go back later and update the preset, all those cues will automatically be updated. So if you need to move that down center stage position to a new value, you can instantly update every cue that is referencing that preset or palette. Very important tool if you're a lighting programmer. Previs is the term we'll use when working with a visualizer. We will say we need to go into previs and work with these fixtures. Basically what that means is that we use a graphical representation of lighting fixtures and maybe the stage plot to help with programming. Sometimes designers use it to create looks to sell themselves for a gig as well. But previs is the act of pre-visualizing, or previs could be the visualizer itself, or it could be a studio, but previs is how we refer to that usually. Moving on to the cues. A quad box is a box that multiplies one output from 1 to 4. And this could be power or data, it doesn't matter, but that's what a quad box is. So you might say you need a quad box that then will take your output from 1 to 4. Quad spanner is kind of interesting. Quad spanner is a specialized tool, but before we talk about that, I'm going to deviate for a brief moment on what is a spanner. And a spanner is a type of wrench, and that's the name. In the United States, we typically call it a crescent wrench. A crescent wrench is an adjustable wrench. In other parts of the world, in the UK and in Europe, sometimes they'll call it a spanner. In Australia, I learned they call it a shifter. It just depends where you are. But back to a quad spanner is a special type of wrench that has 4 different sizes built into it. So you see those 2 holes on the quad spanner there. Each one has a different size adjustment, well, not adjustment, but different size socket, if you will. So there's 4 positions if you flip it over, and it allows you to make use in one wrench, have 4 different size sockets that you can adjust. And typically it's ratcheting as well. So it allows very quick back and forth adjustments. And a lot of technicians have moved from using a crescent or a shifter or a spanner over to a quad style because it allows quick and easy. It's preset. It doesn't need to be adjusted. And you have 4 different sizes to use. Interestingly, there's a brand of quad spanner in the United States that's called Quad Box. And that's a brand name. Kind of funny. All right. We're going to look at the R's. Remote Device Management, or RDM. This is a cool system that allows two-way communication between lighting controllers and lighting devices. So RDM works with DMX and with DMX distribution systems that allows two-way communication. So you can talk to the fixtures and they can talk back to the lighting desk. And the fixtures can provide important information such as how they're configured, what type of fixture they are, their DMX protocol details, can provide all that back to the console. The console can also set the certain parameters of the fixture, can set the DMX address, mode, and other settings of the fixture. And RDM is very, very useful. It's now being made to work with different Ethernet protocols such as SACN and ArtNet. So RDM is a great source that you can use for that, remote device management. Restore is a type of queue. A restore queue is something that you can use to resume or return to any previous state, setting, or function. So for example here, you might have a blackout queue that you fade out at the end of the song or blackout, and then the designer might say restore back to Q7. So that means go back to the state of Q7. Give me the look of Q7. So you're going to do a restore queue. You're going to restore back to what you had before the blackout. That's a restore queue. Rig, typically in the United States and in other parts of the world, people refer to the entire lighting setup as the lighting rig. So more often in a touring type condition or something with a lot of temporary trusses, it'll be called the lighting rig. And that includes everything, the fixtures, the trusses, the cabling, all of that. And someone might say, what do you have in your lighting rig? And that's how rig is used. Shin buster, ouch, that's a painful term, shin busters. And it's funny where it comes from. A shin buster is a floor fixture or the lowest fixture on a boom. Typically, you might have dance booms on the side of the stage in a dancing type show, or maybe in some sort of theatrical production. Any fixtures that are placed down low and in a danger zone where people can run into them or run into the gel frames are called shins or shin busters because people would run into them and typically get cut on their shin. And you'll find this often in theater and dance, shin busters. Now, some people like to sneak around and do sly things, and sneak is a good term. Sneak is another console function, and what this is it allows you to remove data from a live lighting state at a preset speed, or sneak a change on stage. Now, this is a term that is used often on ETC consoles. They actually have a command for sneak. Other consoles have something called programmer time or live fade time, in which, say, for example, you have your fixture, your lighting state, and you see there's a fixture that is pointing in the wrong direction for some reason. It's illuminating a speaker. You would want to sneak that out during the look. You might not want to turn it off instantly, so you want to fade it out across 5 seconds live. You could use a sneak function for that. A snoot, or sometimes called a top hat, is a metal cylinder. Whoops, it faded out. Well, you can still see it. It's a metal cylinder used to limit the light spill, reduce glare, or to hide the source from the audience. And these will typically be put on various types of conventional fixtures, but you'll also see them on moving lights as well. There are snoots for moving lights. And I started off with additive color mixing. The partner to that is subtractive color mixing. And this is where you start with a white light source, and then you use filters to color mix And eventually, if you put in all the filters, you get to no light. So you're subtracting light as opposed to adding light. Typically, we'll find this in a CMY color mixing system, subtractive color mixing. Moving right along, we're getting through here, through the alphabet. A template is a stencil, or used to be. A template was a stencil that was used with a hand-drawn light plots. So it was a little piece of plastic with cutout shapes of the lights you put down, and you could use your pen or pencil to trace it and get the shape of the light. These really aren't used much anymore, but the term template is also refers to a gobo. Some designers, instead of calling it a gobo, will refer to it as a template. So template could be used in either method. Three-fer is another one of those words I call a fun word. Three-fer just sounds like a fun thing to say. Also, you could have a two-fer. Typically, it's a molded type of connector that takes power from one source and goes into 2 or 3 sources, depending if you have a two-fer or a three-fer. Tracking is a very important concept for moving lights, that if you're going to be any type of moving light programmer or even a designer, you need to know tracking. And I strongly suggest you learn tracking. But basically what it means is that a value will remain at its current value until it's changed again. So if you tell a light to be at full intensity in Q1 and you don't change it until Q20 to be at 0, that value will track through all subsequent Qs and it will remain at that value. Be sure to read up on tracking if you're going to learn more about programming automated lighting. Trim is something that we talk about all the time, the trim height. This is the height of a hanging position or of battens or set pieces as well. And it's usually measured from the ground or from the stage, depending on what type of production you're doing. And it's very important to be able to recall the trim height, because if you put your fixtures at a certain trim height, let's say 20 feet off the ground, and then there's a problem and they lower the truss in, they need to know where to put the truss back at. And if you have not defined and marked and measured the trim height, now you're going to have to guess where the fixtures go back, or the height goes back to, and then all your fixture positioning and your focuses will be incorrect. So the trim or trim height is a very important metric that you need to measure and be aware of in your lighting designs and lighting setups. Two-scene preset is a type of lighting controller that allows you to adjust on 2 different areas on the console, adjust different parameters or values or faders, and then you can crossfade between them with one general big fader. Now, typically, this is an older type of lighting console used with conventional lighting, where you would preset, you would have a piece of paper, you would set all your values on the A section of your two-scene preset, and that would be live on stage. That's Q1. And then while you're on Q1, you would set Q2 down on the bottom part, and then you would grab the fader and you'd crossfade down to Q2. You'd reset Q1 to now be Q3, and you crossfade back up to that. And if you've never controlled a two-scene preset, I highly suggest you jump on one and learn it. It's a great tool to learn lighting in a fun and exciting manner. Ultraviolet is a short wavelength of light that's usually at the, not usually, it does live at the end of the visible light spectrum. And in theatrical productions and all different types of productions, we'll use ultraviolet light because it has a special property in which treated materials can fluoresce under ultraviolet light. And it really creates those cool, exciting things that on a dark stage, you can make something glow and look to be self-illuminating. And that's because the UV light is really not visible by humans if it's a true UV wavelength, but yet certain items can fluoresce and create that great glow themselves. Universe, the whole mighty universe is where we live, but what we're talking about here is the collection of 512 DMX channels. So one universe holds 512 DMX channels, and that's how it was defined originally, and typically a universe would be one run of cable as well. But we break down 512 channels of DMX into a universe. And maybe someday we'll have something where it's just one big giant universe, but you typically will have multiple universes on a show coming from your lighting desk to your various fixtures. Uplight is a great look. I talked about downlight earlier. Uplight, of course, is the opposite. It's something down low, pushing upward. And uplight is used a lot in architectural lighting or in scenic looks. It's a really great look. You can also use it for that scary feeling of an artist shooting straight up on, like when people hold flashlights for camping out and telling ghost stories. Uplight is a great look, again, for a lot of scenic elements as well. And we also spoke about downstage back at the beginning of this presentation. So I felt it was only right to also mention upstage, which is the furthest away or on a right stage upward, but the furthest away from the audience or closest to the back wall of the venue. That's typically the upstage area. And speaking of the venue is a great word. Venue is the area or the room where a show is taking place. So a venue could be a parking garage. It could be a grand opera house. It could be anything. Wherever you're holding your production becomes the venue. And it's important to talk about how the venue is defined, and do you need to light the venue if you're the lighting designer, and what is the venue? So venue is a great term. Yeah, wrap that one up, right? Voltage. Voltage, when we talk about electricity, this is the pressure at which electrical current is available. So if you think of a pipe of water, for example, how much pressure, how much is pushing it out? That's similar to voltage. Across the world, there's different voltages. They're from 100 to 240 volts. Most lighting products today have the power to automatically switch, but a lot of older ones did not. You had to switch what voltage they worked with. And if you get the voltage wrong, if you have something that's made for 100 volts or 120 volts, and you give it 240 volts, you're going to blow it up. Or vice versa, if you have something that goes the other way, it's not going to operate. So it's important to know the voltage of your products. And here's one of my favorite words, vomitorium. Now, this is not a lighting term in sense, but it's more of a scenic area. And a vomitorium is the passageway in amphitheaters and stadiums that people use to enter or exit. So a vomitorium is that little cutout. You've seen it in sporting spaces. You might have seen it in theaters, such as this photo here. And sometimes as a lighting programmer, you might be told to focus the lights in the vom or the vomitorium. Sometimes it's shortened to vom. What's kind of fun is this term comes from the Latin verb vomere, which means to spew forth. And the way it came from is when the original Roman amphitheaters, they had their big walkways like this. When a show was over, everyone rushed to the exit, making it seem as if people were spewing out of the arena or to spew forth. And so that's where the term comes from, vomitorium, or again, you might have just heard of it called vom. A lot of events in stadiums will have lights placed above the vom, and those will be the vom lights or the vomitorium lights. All right, we're almost to the end. Sorry, this has been a long one, but it's fun. Hope you're enjoying it. So wash, two different terms for wash. A wash is a broad coverage of light over a stage or acting area. So a wash could just be a broad coverage to illuminate an area. You might say, I need a wash because there's going to be 100 people on stage. Typically, it's also a soft focus, not a hard edge. It's also a specific type of fixture that produces that soft focus. So you might have a wash light. There's many different types of wash lights from many different manufacturers that provide that soft, wide output. Sometimes they can also be adjusted in shape by shutters or barn doors, or even optically in different methods. We talked about voltage. Wattage is the unit of electrical power derived from the current multiplied by the voltage. And stage lighting equipment is usually rated in watts. So especially when we had real lamps, you would say this is a 1,000-watt lamp in the fixture or a 1,200-watt lamp. Now that we have LED systems, we still kind of use wattage. We'll say it's a 1,000-watt LED engine, and that refers to how many watts it's utilizing, but it doesn't exactly equate the same as how bright a lamp was at 1,000 watts. It's a little different, but it's how much power is being required by that light source is how we make use of that. And again, typically, the higher the wattage, the brighter the lamp or the light engine. Wavelength is the distance from one point on a vibrating wave to the same point on the next wave. In lighting, we use wavelength to talk about the visible spectrum. Typically, we'll say what the wavelength is to define color. So we look at the spectrum, our red, green, orange, Roy G. Biv, and we look at that and we break it down into their different wavelengths, and we can measure that in nanometers and define wavelengths of light. Now, a work light can be a light like you see here that you go buy at Home Depot. Sometimes those are used creatively in theatrical productions and concerts, but typically a work light, more importantly, is just that light to work under. It's the non-show lighting that is utilized for purposes of doing work. So say the lighting team needs to leave and the scenic team needs to do some work on the set, you'll turn on the work lights. And in a lot of venues, those will be lights that are installed above the lighting rig that can be turned on and off easily to illuminate the space. So work lights serve the purpose of allowing basic light for work and are typically not part of the main theatrical or concert lighting. Xenon was a type of lamp that you might see in a follow spot or a strobe light. It was a discharge lamp that used xenon gas inside it. Really, really bright and really, really dangerous. These were known to explode as well. They were around quite often. They still are. You can find them sometimes. But nowadays, most everything's kind of moving on to LEDs, so we don't see a lot of xenon lamps anymore out there. XLR are very nice locking connectors. It's a metallic connector that's round with multiple pins in it. Most common, we are aware of 5-pin XLR for DMX, but you might find different types of XLRs used for 4-pin for color scrollers or different types of products that you might be making use of. In some parts of the world, these could also be called Canons, which is actually named for an original manufacturer of this type of plug that was called Canon. So you might be called Canons or XLR connectors. X-ray is a wavelength of light that can be utilized to see through things. We all know that, to see an X-ray. It's a way off wavelength of light, but it's also used as a term to refer to a specific type of horizontal cyclights or ground rows. Some people refer to them as X-rays. So in some theater markets, people say X-rays, and they're referring to a type of light that has a lot of different elements to it. The yoke of a fixture is actually the arms that support the moving lights. So most moving lights have a yoke, and that's what holds the head and allows the yoke to move and spin around, and then the head can rotate through the yoke. And that we call the yoke. And sometimes you'll even hear yoke arms on a moving fixture. A Y cable is a cable that splits a single connection into two. Typically, these are used with data. So you have one connector that breaks out into two, and that might be useful if you have certain types of things you're trying to split into multiple connectors. However, never use a Y cable for DMX. Never, ever do that. It's very bad. You need a proper DMX splitter or opto isolator or opto distribution device, something like that. Do not use a Y cable for DMX. And we've made it to Z. All right. So a zip strip is a multi-cell unit. Originally was sold by Altman under the name zip strip, but it's also kind of become one of those generic things that refer to MR16 based strip lights. So a strip light that had the really small MR16 lamps in it became known as a zip strip, whether it was the actual Altman one or not. It just kind of became a generic term. I saw some early LED products that were zip strip type products, but we've kind of moved away from those, I think, at this point, but who knows? And then finally, we're going to talk about zoom. Zoom is the ability to adjust an optical system between different settings, and it typically will change the beam angle or the output field of that product. It could be manual, such as a zoom lens on an ellipsoidal or zoom in a Fresnel, or it could be automated like in a moving light where you can control the zoom of a fixture and it changes the output through the optical system. All right, thank you for sticking with me through this. A couple last little points to make. I gave you lots and lots of fun words. Of course, there's a lot more out there. I actually, again, started with more and trimmed out some. But this has been fun to go through these words. If you really want to dive in and learn a lot more terminology, there's this great website at theatercrafts.com. And you can go to theatercrafts.com and they have a glossary there or a search function you can type in. And there's a lot of information on that site. I highly suggest you go check out terms there as well. So thank you for that. And again, thank you for listening. And I'm willing to take any questions you have. If you have further questions, my contact details on the screen as well, and you can reach out to me anytime you want through that method.
Hey, Brad, we did have a couple questions come through if you're all set.
Okay.
The first question is, how do lighting-specific terms work when you're speaking through a translator?
Yeah, that's tricky because when you're in different parts of the world and you're working with a translator, they don't always know these lighting terms. So they don't know what you're talking about and they don't have a word to translate it. And sometimes if the other person that they're translating to doesn't know what it is, it becomes even harder. I once was doing a show trying to use the word home when I used it for reset. I was saying that trying to tell the lighting director he needs to home fixture 52. And I thought I was being smart and using this basic high school Spanish. And I translated myself and used casa, which I believe means house or home. And he didn't know what I meant when I told him he needs to casa that fixture. It just didn't work. So yes, it can be tricky working with translators and these terms.
Great. The next question is, you mentioned fat finger and the problems it creates. Can you suggest how to prevent this?
Yeah, fat finger happens mostly when you're going really fast, but sometimes also you've got to look if you're hitting a button with two fingers or one. Maybe you need to reduce to one or use your thumb, whatever works better for you, or change the angular rotation of your desk. The ergonomics of how you're positioned or how you're seated or standing all come into play.
Great. The next question is, does festoon lighting need to be random or linear, and which is better?
Yeah, that's really a design choice. I've seen some festoon lighting where it's all perfectly organized and linear and symmetrical, and I've seen where it's all placed random and crazy. I think I tend to lean towards the random and crazy myself, but it depends on the show.
Great. It looks like we have one more. I have heard the term nodding buckets, but you did not explain this. What is this?
Yeah, nodding buckets, that's funny. That's more of a slang that kind of came and went, one of those terms that we don't hear anymore. I believe it started in the UK at the beginning of moving lights. Someone came up and said they saw these things that looked like buckets moving around up in the lighting rig, and it kind of stuck. They were nodding buckets. They were moving buckets, nodding up and down, moving around. And a few people used that term for a while at the beginning of moving lights, but I actually haven't heard that in a long time. That's a good one.
Great. So another one did come in. Why shouldn't Y cables be used for DMX?
Well, with DMX, typically what happens is you'll end up with termination or lack of termination problems when you use a Y cable to split the signal. DMX has very stringent rules of how many fixtures you can connect. I believe it's about 32 fixtures on the DMX line, although we all do more than that. But it's better to use a splitter that will replicate the DMX line across than to trying to split it up. It just doesn't work well. You'll find lots of problems with fixtures behaving erratically and whatnot.
Perfect. That looks like all the questions. I want to thank everyone for joining. And Brad, thank you for your time. This was a great session.
Oh, you're welcome. I hope everybody enjoyed the words. I had fun putting this together. So thank you all for joining.
Great. I hope everyone has the great rest of their day.